What's the most evil thing someone did while you were asleep? When I woke up with random bruises all over my hips, I joked to my boyfriend that I'm just a girl. But a week later, when they covered my entire body, I started panicking. Nathan was examining them with this intense focus, running his fingers over them with a deep fascination. "These are perfectly symmetrical," he murmured, pulling out his phone to take photos. "That's weird, right?" I asked, but he was already writing in a notebook, adding timestamps. By week 3, I couldn't wear anything sleeveless and was exhausted. I literally fell asleep during a client presentation. I thought the symptoms would end there, until one day when my period just stopped. Mid-cycle, like someone flipped a switch. "That's not normal," I told Nathan, and his eyes lit up. "When exactly did it stop? What day?" The way he asked made my stomach twist. The bruises kept appearing in places I couldn't even reach. I tried recording myself sleeping, but the files were always corrupted. "Must be the Wi-Fi," Nathan said, though Netflix worked perfectly. I was about to make a doctor's appointment when Dana, his ex, messaged me on Instagram. "Check your hormone levels immediately. Please." I almost ignored it, but she followed up with a photo of her own bruises, identical pattern to mine. I drove straight to the Starbucks she suggested, and when I saw her, I almost gasped. She looked closer to 50 than 25, and she cut straight to the chase. "The bruises. They're injection sites. Nathan is doing something to you." My hands started shaking. "That's insane." She pulled up her medical records on her phone. "Look at this. I have the hormone levels of a 55-year-old woman. I practically went through menopause at 25. She leaned closer. "His mother taught him. She runs that fertility clinic on Lexington." I couldn't breathe. "He uses numbing cream while you sleep. You never feel the needles." I drove straight from Starbucks to the nearest ER, with Dana's medical records still pulled up on my phone as evidence, and demanded hormone testing. The doctor frowned at the results. "Are you taking Lupron? For endometriosis, perchance?" When I asked what that was, her face went pale. "Lupron shuts down your ovaries. We use it for endometriosis or IVF, but in high doses it can cause permanent damage." That night I forced myself to stay awake, fighting the bone-deep exhaustion. It was 3 a.m. when I felt the cold cream on my hip, then numbness spreading. Through slitted eyes, I watched Nathan pull out a syringe, finding the exact spot to insert into. I knew catching him in the act meant putting myself in danger, so I forced myself to lie still while my heart pounded so hard I thought he'd hear it. The next day, while he was at work, I tore apart our apartment. Nothing. Then I remembered the guitar case he never touched. I opened it up and felt my heart drop. Inside were vials of Lupron with my name on prescriptions I'd never seen, syringes, lidocaine cream. His notebook made me vomit. My exact hormone levels predicted weeks in advance, all matching my blood work perfectly. I must have been sitting there for hours before I heard him come home and confronted him immediately. "What is this?" I asked, throwing the notebook at his chest. He didn't even flinch. "You said you wanted to make a difference." His voice was calm, almost proud. "What are you talking about?" I was screaming now. "Your eggs are helping infertile couples. 3 babies are already on the way." The room spun. "My eggs?" He pulled up his laptop, showing me security footage from his mother's clinic. There I was, seemingly awake, signing consent forms. "I don't remember this," he shrugged. "The sedative causes amnesia but keeps you compliant. Mom's been perfecting it for years." I couldn't stand. "When I thought I had appendicitis and got surgery from the free guy your mom recommended." "Yeah, that was egg retrieval," he laughed. "We managed to retrieve 67 eggs. But baby, you have premium genetics. Your SAT scores, your IQ test from college. Couples paid $100,000 each." The admiration in his voice made me want to vomit. I ran to the bathroom and locked the door, and that's when my phone started blowing up with texts from Dana. She had given me more names of his exes. 5 women, all infertile by 25, all with the same story. I called them all. Nathan's mother had been doing this for 15 years. I burst out and found him standing by the doorway smirking. I lunged, but my body was too weak. He caught my wrists. "The damage is irreversible, if you're wondering. Your ovaries are dead tissue now. But I did it for you. And I'd still marry you." "I'd still marry you too," I responded, staring at him with fake doe eyes. And that dumbass ate up every word of it. When he kissed me back, I had to stop myself from laughing, because I still had his key. I knew his schedule. He'd taught me exactly how to use syringes, and soon he'd wake up to the same nightmare he'd given 15 women, except his would never end. The alarm on my phone went off at 4:30 a.m., and I reached over to silence it before Nathan could wake up. My bag was already packed with the vials, his notebook and photos I'd taken of everything in the guitar case. Nathan rolled over in his sleep and draped his arm across my stomach, making my skin crawl. I stayed still for 20 minutes until his breathing got deep again, then slipped out from under him. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my keys. I texted him from the car about an emergency client meeting, knowing he wouldn't wake up to read it for hours. The storage place on Route 9 was open 24/7 with keypad entry, and I'd rented a unit there last month under my old roommate Sarah's name when I first started feeling paranoid. I locked everything in a fireproof box, then spent an hour uploading photos to 3 different cloud accounts Nathan didn't know about. My Gmail, an old Yahoo account from college, and a new Proton mail I'd created at the library. Back at the apartment that afternoon, Nathan was at his gym class like every Saturday. I used the drill I'd bought at Home Depot to install a new deadbolt on my bedroom door. The smart home stuff he'd put in took longer to figure out. I disconnected the Alexa, the Nest cameras, even the smart thermostat. When he got home and asked about the lock, I told him I'd been having bad dreams and needed to feel safer. He actually smiled and said he understood. Dana called while he was in the shower to check if I was okay. I whispered everything about the guitar case discovery, and she gave me 5 more phone numbers. She said Nathan got worse with each woman, more controlling, and that 2 of them had tried going to police but got nowhere. The next few days blurred together. I hit 3 medical offices on Monday morning, telling each receptionist I needed complete records for insurance reasons. At the second place, the woman behind the desk looked confused and said nobody ever asks for raw lab data and timestamps. I just smiled and said my new insurance was really strict. That afternoon, I set up my laptop in my car outside a Dunkin' Donuts and recorded myself talking for 40 minutes straight. Everything from the first bruises to finding the guitar case. My voice cracked when I described the fake surgery and again when I talked about the 67 eggs. But I kept going because I knew I needed this while everything was still fresh. Tuesday morning, my boss Karen pulled me into her office. She had a folder with my name on it and started listing all my missed deadlines and the client presentation disaster. She put me on a performance improvement plan and said I had 30 days to turn things around, or they'd have to let me go. I wanted to scream that I was being slowly poisoned and harvested like some kind of farm animal, but I just nodded and promised to do better. The rage was so strong I had to dig my nails into my palms. I found the studio apartment that same afternoon during my lunch break. It was small and smelled weird, but the landlord took cash and didn't ask for references. Month-to-month lease starting immediately. I gave him $1,220 from various ATM withdrawals. Thursday, I walked into the police station with a folder full of evidence. The cop at the front desk barely glanced at my medical records before saying, "This sounded like a domestic issue. Maybe I should try family court if I wanted a restraining order." I stood there for a full minute just staring at him before walking out. That's when I called the victim's legal clinic Dana had mentioned. They connected me with Nora Simpson the next day. She specialized in medical assault cases, and her office walls were covered with newspaper clippings about cases she'd won. She listened to my whole story without interrupting once, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she started explaining our options. Civil lawsuit for damages, criminal charges if we could get the DA interested, and complaints to the medical board about Nathan's mother. She said the medical board route was actually our best bet because they took license violations seriously and moved faster than criminal courts. We could file complaints for both Nathan practicing medicine without a license and his mother's ethical violations. She'd take my case pro bono because she said this was exactly the kind of predatory behavior that made her become a lawyer in the first place. Back at my apartment that night, I was going through old bank statements when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were charges from Nathan's mom's clinic going back months, thousands of dollars total, all dated around when I thought I was getting my appendix out. The signatures on the credit card slips looked like mine, but I had zero memory of signing them. My hands shook as I took photos of every single statement. The next morning, while Nathan was in the shower, I started packing a bag with just the basics, shoving clothes into my old gym bag as quietly as possible. My phone rang and it was him calling from the bathroom asking where his razor was. I hit record on my phone and told him it was in the cabinet. He started rambling about how the couples who got my eggs were so grateful and how we were helping people who couldn't have kids naturally. He said it like we were donating old furniture to charity. I had to mute myself to run to the kitchen sink and dry heave. 2 days later, I sat in front of a judge with all my evidence spread out on her desk. She barely looked at the injection sites on my arms or the medical records showing the Lupron levels. She said without specific threats of violence or actual physical assault, this was a criminal matter, not grounds for a protective order. I walked out of that courthouse feeling completely alone. My friend Sarah came over at 2 a.m. that night while Nathan was passed out from drinking. We worked in total silence, taking only what I absolutely needed, like my laptop, important documents, some clothes. We left everything else to avoid him noticing anything was missing. Every creak of the floor made my heart race. The next day from my new apartment, I sent an email to Rex Guthrie, this journalist who'd exposed a huge medical fraud case last year. I attached select evidence and wrote out a careful summary of what Nathan and his mom had been doing. He replied within 3 hours saying he was interested but needed more proof, more victims willing to go on record before he could publish anything. I made an appointment with an endocrinologist that week and sat there while she explained my test results. She said my ovaries showed damage consistent with long-term exposure to GnRH agonists, basically chemical castration. She used words like permanent damage and medically induced menopause at 25. She started me on hormone replacement therapy and said I'd probably need it for the rest of my life. That same afternoon, Aurora Townsend called me after Dana gave her my number. We set up a video call with her and 3 other women Nathan had done this to. Everyone had the same story about the bruises, the exhaustion, the fake surgeries at his mom's clinic. We all agreed to work together, share evidence, coordinate our response. The next morning, I got a message on Signal from someone named Leah Rodriguez. She said she was a nurse at Nathan's mom's clinic and had information about their special protocols for certain patients. She was scared but couldn't stay quiet anymore after seeing what they'd done to us. She wanted to meet in person, but only in a public place with lots of people around. 3 days later, HR called me in for another meeting about my performance. They went through a list of missed deadlines and the presentation I'd fallen asleep during. They said if things didn't improve immediately, my job was at risk. I sat there nodding while they talked, knowing I couldn't explain that I was being slowly poisoned for months, knowing I might lose my income right when medical bills were piling up. That evening, I met with Nora again, and she laid out our whole strategy on a whiteboard in her office. She said we needed to focus on preserving evidence and building an airtight case through proper legal channels. She looked me straight in the eye and said any vigilante actions, anything that could be seen as revenge instead of justice, would destroy our entire case and probably land me in jail. She could see something in my face because she made me promise 3 times that I'd let the legal system handle this. Over the next few days, I threw myself into gathering more evidence, organizing everything into folders with dates and labels. I found more credit card charges I didn't remember, more signatures that looked like mine but felt wrong. I started a spreadsheet tracking every symptom, every bruise, every day I'd been too tired to function. Dana connected me with 2 more women who'd dated Nathan years ago. One of them couldn't have kids at all now. The other had aged. So much she looked 20 years older than she was. We all had the same injection patterns, the same exhaustion, the same memory gaps around medical procedures. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow even though Nathan didn't know where I was staying. I installed 3 different locks on my door and a security camera that uploaded straight to the cloud. I knew I was being paranoid, but I couldn't stop checking over my shoulder everywhere I went. My body was falling apart from the hormone damage with hot flashes that made me sweat through my sheets and bone pain that kept me up all night. The hormone replacement helped a little, but the doctor said recovery would take months if it happened at all. I kept all of Nathan's texts where he asked about getting back together, where he said he missed me, where he said we could start fresh. I forwarded everything to Nora and the police even though they still hadn't done anything about my criminal complaint. Nora called me the next morning saying we needed to move fast with the state medical board complaint. I met her at her office where Dana and 3 other victims were already waiting with their sworn statements printed out. We spent 4 hours going through every detail, making sure our allegations would trigger the mandatory investigation protocols Nora knew about from previous cases. She typed while we talked, formatting everything into the specific language the board needed to hear. My hands shook as I signed my statement describing the bruises, the exhaustion, the stolen eggs. Rex showed up just as we finished and pulled me aside to explain FOIA requests. He had a stack of forms ready for the clinic's inspection history, previous complaints, anything that might show a pattern. The paperwork was mind-numbing, but Rex said these documents often revealed cover-ups that victims never knew about. I filled out form after form while he explained how government agencies tried to avoid releasing damaging information. That afternoon, Dana texted me a link she found about Nathan's mother. My stomach dropped when I saw she sat on the board of directors at 2 major hospitals in our area. She was on committees that reviewed ethics complaints, which explained why previous victims got nowhere when they tried to report her. The woman who destroyed our bodies was literally investigating herself. I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with everything we still needed to prove. At 3 a.m., I found myself getting dressed and grabbing my car keys. My body moved on its own, driving toward Nathan's apartment like I was pulled by a magnet. I needed more evidence, something we'd missed, something that would guarantee they couldn't escape justice. I made it halfway there before forcing myself to pull into a gas station parking lot. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Going back would be stupid and dangerous and could ruin everything Nora was building. I sat there for an hour before finally turning around and driving back to my temporary place. The next day, Rex called with information from his private investigator. 3 previous patients had filed complaints against the clinic that got settled with NDAs. The amounts were huge, enough to buy silence and make problems disappear. One woman got $200,000, another got $350,000, the third got $500,000. All 3 signed agreements never to discuss what happened to them. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Rex had their names but couldn't contact them without violating the NDAs. Our victim coalition met at Nora's office that weekend to calculate damages. We brought medical bills, therapy receipts, documentation of lost wages from being too sick to work. The hormone treatments alone were costing me $800 a month. Dana had spent $30,000 on failed fertility treatments before learning her ovaries were destroyed. Aurora had lost her job after months of exhaustion and medical appointments. When Nora added everything up, the number made us all go quiet. We were looking at millions in damages, and that was just the financial costs. She explained we'd file as a group for maximum impact, showing the pattern of abuse. I knew I needed Nathan to incriminate himself more, so I called him that night while recording on my laptop. I played dumb, asking questions about the eggs like I was trying to understand. He couldn't help bragging about the premium genetics, how my SAT scores and college IQ test made me worth so much. He actually laughed, describing how couples paid $100,000 each for eggs from someone with my educational background. His pride in what he'd done made my skin crawl, but I kept him talking for 20 minutes, getting every detail on tape. Rex met me at a coffee shop downtown the next morning looking frustrated. He'd been investigating for weeks but needed someone from inside the clinic to go on record. Without an insider confirming the systematic nature of the operation, he could only report on individual victims. He needed proof this was an organized scheme, not just Nathan acting alone. I remembered Leah saying she had more information, but was scared to go fully public. 2 weeks later, an official letter arrived from the medical board acknowledging our complaint. They'd opened a preliminary investigation and needed additional statements and documentation within 30 days. It was the first real sign that someone in authority was taking this seriously, instead of dismissing us as hysterical women. Nora said this was huge, that the board rarely moved this fast unless they saw clear evidence of violations. We spent the next 3 days gathering every piece of documentation they requested. Then a letter came from the clinic offering me a complimentary consultation to discuss my concerns. The language was friendly, talking about resolving misunderstandings and ensuring patient satisfaction. Nora took one look at it and recognized exactly what it was. They wanted to get me alone in a room to sign an NDA, probably with a check attached to make it tempting. She told me not to respond at all, not even to decline, because any direct contact could be twisted later. The clinic was getting nervous and starting to make moves to protect themselves. 3 days later, I was walking out of my office building for lunch when I saw Nathan standing by the entrance. My whole body went cold. He started walking toward me with his hands up like he was being peaceful. I pulled out my phone immediately and started recording. He kept saying we needed to talk about working things out. I backed away and dialed 911 while keeping the camera on him. The dispatcher asked if I was in immediate danger. I told her about the restraining order I'd filed for. Nathan heard me mention police and started backing away fast. By the time the cops showed up 10 minutes later, he was long gone. I gave them the video and filed another report. The next morning, I sat in front of the judge with all my documentation spread out. She looked at the stalking incident report from yesterday. She reviewed the pattern of him showing up places. After 20 minutes, she signed the temporary restraining order. It was only good for 2 weeks, but it was something. Nora called me that afternoon about the vials I'd saved from Nathan's guitar case. She'd found an independent lab that could test them properly. We needed to establish chain of custody for court. I met her at the lab with the vials in a sealed bag I hadn't opened. The technician photographed everything and had me sign forms. They said results would take a week. Nora explained they'd test for the drug composition and dust for fingerprints. She wanted ironclad evidence linking Nathan directly to the injections. A week later, the results came back exactly like we expected. The vials contained pharmaceutical-grade Lupron at concentrations used for chemical castration. They found multiple clear fingerprints on the vials and syringes. Nora had gotten Nathan's prints from his arrest records. Every single print matched perfectly. We finally had physical proof he'd been handling these drugs. The lab tech said the fingerprints were fresh and undegraded. This wasn't old evidence, but recent handling. Leah called me that same day saying she was ready to go on record. She'd been wrestling with her conscience for weeks. She agreed to provide a sworn affidavit about everything she'd seen at the clinic. We met at Nora's office where a notary was waiting. Leah's hands shook as she described the clinic's special protocols. She explained how they sedated certain patients without proper consent. She'd seen them backdate forms to cover their tracks. She named specific dates when she'd witnessed Nathan's mother directing these procedures. She described the separate filing system for special cases like mine. Rex had been waiting for exactly this kind of insider testimony. Leah's statement gave him the corroboration he needed for his story. 2 days later, Detective Weston Collier called about taking over our case. He'd been assigned by the department to investigate the criminal complaints. He came to Nora's office to review all our evidence. He was thorough and took detailed notes about everything, but then he dropped bad news on us. The DA wanted more evidence directly linking Nathan's mother to the conspiracy. Her lawyers were already claiming she had no knowledge of Nathan's actions. They were painting him as a rogue employee who acted alone. Without proof of her direct involvement, she might walk free. Our victim coalition met that weekend to sign the official paperwork. All 7 of us gathered in Nora's conference room. We signed as plaintiffs in the civil suit against Nathan and his mother. Nora explained our media strategy for maximum impact. We'd file the suit publicly to put pressure on authorities. The press coverage would make it harder for them to sweep this under the rug. Each woman shared what she'd been through with Nathan. The patterns were identical down to the smallest details. Rex called me the next morning with news that made me sick. He'd been following the money trail from the egg sales. He'd found one couple who unknowingly bought my eggs. They'd paid $110,000 for what they thought were donated eggs. The clinic had told them I was a willing donor. Rex kept their names anonymous to protect them. But seeing the actual bank records made it real. My genetic material had been sold like property. The thought of babies out there with my DNA made me dizzy. I had to sit down and breathe through the nausea. That afternoon, we served the clinic with a preservation letter. Nora's paralegal delivered it directly to their administrative office. The letter required them to keep all records and communications. They couldn't destroy any emails, files, or video footage now. Nora explained this was crucial for our case. If they deleted anything after receiving the letter, it would be criminal obstruction. The clinic's lawyers would know this and advise compliance. We were building a paper trail they couldn't escape. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. Nathan's mother's attorney had sent an aggressive cease and desist letter. They threatened to sue me for defamation if I didn't stop my false allegations immediately. The language was harsh and clearly meant to scare me. They claimed I was a disgruntled ex trying to extort money. They said my lies were damaging her professional reputation. The letter demanded I retract all statements within 48 hours. Nora had warned me this might happen. It was a common intimidation tactic to silence victims, but reading their threats just made me more determined. They were scared because they knew we had real evidence. The more they tried to bully me, the more I knew we were on the right track. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop with Instagram notifications. Someone had created fake accounts using my old photos and was posting them with captions about how I was just a bitter ex trying to destroy a good man's life. They'd found my LinkedIn, my old Facebook photos from college, even pictures from my sister's wedding. The comments were brutal, calling me every name you can imagine, saying I deserved what happened, that I was probably lying about everything. I spent 3 hours trying to report the accounts, but new ones kept popping up faster than Instagram could take them down. My work email started getting flooded with messages from strangers telling me to drop the charges, some threatening to show up at my office, others sending graphic descriptions of what they wanted to do to me. I had to call IT to help me lock down everything, change all my passwords, make my social media private, and finally just deleted most of my accounts completely. My phone number got posted somewhere because I started getting calls at all hours, heavy breathing, men's voices saying they knew where I lived, so I drove straight to Verizon and got a new number that I only gave to 5 people. The stress was making my body fall apart worse than before. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my sheets soaked through, then 5 minutes later I'd be freezing and shaking under 3 blankets. My joints hurt so bad I could barely get out of bed some mornings, and the headaches made it impossible to focus on anything. I missed 2 more days of work, and my boss pulled me aside to say HR was getting involved if my attendance didn't improve immediately. The endocrinologist ran more tests and explained that my body was basically going through menopause at 25, that the hormone replacement therapy would help, but it would take months to stabilize and I'd need to take these pills for the rest of my life. She prescribed estrogen patches and progesterone pills, warning me about mood swings, weight gain, and that natural pregnancy was extremely unlikely now. I sat in my car after that appointment and cried for an hour, not because I wanted kids right now, but because he'd stolen that choice from me forever. That night, I couldn't sleep and found myself on medical websites reading everything about Lupron, how it works, what doses they use, where to inject it for maximum absorption. I told myself I was just trying to understand what he'd done to me, but I kept bookmarking pages about injection techniques, saving diagrams of injection sites on the abdomen and thighs. My search history got darker as I learned about the different concentrations, how the 3-month depot shots work versus daily injections, what happens when men take it for prostate cancer. I found forums where trans men discussed using it to stop estrogen production, and felt sick realizing Nathan had essentially done the reverse to me and the other women. I stayed up until 4 in the morning watching YouTube videos of nurses demonstrating subcutaneous injection techniques, practicing the motion with a pen against my thigh, memorizing the exact angle and depth needed. The knowledge felt dangerous in my hands, and I kept thinking about that key I still had to his apartment, how easy it would be to do to him what he'd done to us. 3 nights later, I was startled awake by movement outside my window, and saw Nathan standing in the parking lot staring up at my apartment. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and started recording him, zooming in to clearly show his face in the streetlight. He stood there for 20 minutes just watching my window, and when he started walking toward the building entrance, I called 911 immediately. The dispatcher kept me on the line while I described what was happening, and I could hear the sirens getting closer as Nathan suddenly turned and ran back to his car. The cops showed up 5 minutes after he left, took my statement, looked at the video, and said they'd add it to the report for violating the restraining order. The next morning, Nora called me into her office, and I could tell from her face she knew something. She sat me down and spoke very carefully about how she understood my anger, how she'd seen that look in my eyes when I talked about the injections, but that any attempt at revenge would destroy our entire case. She made me look her in the eye and promise I wouldn't do anything stupid, that I'd let the legal system handle it, that she'd personally make sure he paid for what he'd done, but only if I stayed clean. I promised her I would, but we both knew I was lying, and she made me give her the key to Nathan's apartment right then and there. Detective Collier called that afternoon with a plan to get Nathan talking on a recorded line about the technical details, saying the DA needed more evidence connecting his mother to the conspiracy. I spent an hour preparing, writing down specific questions to ask, practicing how to sound casual while getting him to admit things. When Nathan answered, he sounded happy to hear from me, like we were old friends catching up and I had to force myself not to throw up. I asked him about the injections, playing dumb about how he'd managed to do it without waking me. And he actually laughed as he explained the lidocaine cream ratios, how his mom had taught him to wait exactly 15 minutes for full numbness before inserting the needle. He went into detail about the injection sites, rotating between hips and abdomen to avoid scar tissue buildup, how the 3-month Lupron depot was more efficient than daily shots. He kept talking about his mom's protocols, her sedative schedule that kept patients compliant but mobile, how she'd perfected the timing so women would sign consent forms they'd never remember. When I asked how she got away with it for so long, He said she knew which medical board members to donate to, which hospital administrators owed her favors, acting like it was all just smart business. The recording went on for 40 minutes with him bragging about their system, never once showing any guilt or awareness that he'd destroyed multiple lives. That evening, my phone rang from an unknown number, and when I answered, it was Nathan's mother, her voice sweet like honey, as she said she wanted to make things right. She offered to pay for all my medical treatment, said she could set me up with the best specialists, even suggested she could reverse some of the damage if I came to her clinic. When I stayed silent, she switched tactics, her voice turning cold as she said I had no idea who I was messing with, that she had connections everywhere, that she could make sure I never worked in this city again. She said people would believe a respected doctor over some hysterical girl, that she had ways of making problems disappear, that I should think very carefully about my next move. I recorded the entire call on my laptop, her threats getting more explicit as she realized I wasn't backing down, and immediately emailed the file to Nora with a backup to my personal cloud storage. 2 days later, Nora called with incredible news that the medical board had scheduled an emergency license suspension hearing for the following week. They'd issued subpoenas for all the clinic's records, patient files, financial documents, everything going back 15 years. Rex's preliminary article about medical fraud at fertility clinics had gone viral, putting pressure on the board to act faster than anyone expected. The board members who'd been protecting Nathan's mother were suddenly distancing themselves, not wanting to be connected to the scandal when it fully broke. Nora said this was moving at light speed for a medical board investigation, that usually these things took months or years, but the media attention was forcing their hand. Leah called me that afternoon with her voice shaking but determined. She'd managed to copy dozens of consent forms from the clinic's computer system before anyone noticed. When we met at a coffee shop downtown, she spread the papers across the table with trembling hands. The metadata showed clear signs of tampering, dates that didn't match up, signatures that looked too perfect. She'd risked her entire career getting these documents, but she said watching what they did to us made her sick every single day. I took photos of everything while she watched the door nervously. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan saying he was leaving town and wanted to apologize properly before he went. The message made my skin crawl, but I forwarded it straight to Detective Collier. He called back within minutes, confirming they had officers watching Nathan's apartment and tracking his credit cards. The next morning, Leah met with Nora at her law office to make everything official. Nora walked her through the whistleblower paperwork, explaining the protections she'd have against retaliation. Leah's hands shook as she signed each form, knowing this meant she could never work in healthcare in this city again. 3 days later, we sat in the medical board hearing room while Nathan's mother's lawyer tore into us. She called me a scorned woman seeking revenge, said Dana was mentally unstable, claimed Aurora had financial motives. I gripped the edge of my chair so hard my knuckles turned white but kept my voice steady as I read from my medical records. Dana presented her hormone tests from 5 different labs. Aurora showed photos of her injection sites mapped in the same pattern as ours. The lawyer kept interrupting, objecting to everything, trying to make us look crazy or vindictive. When it came time to vote, the board members didn't even need to discuss it. They voted unanimously to suspend her license immediately pending full investigation. She sat there with her jaw clenched, staring at me with pure hatred while her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. The next morning, police showed up at the clinic with a search warrant. I watched from across the street as they carried out boxes of files and computers. Detective Collier called later to say they'd found partial records and medication supplies, but someone had deleted key computer files the night before. It wasn't surprising given how much warning they'd had, but it was still frustrating knowing evidence was lost. 2 days after that, the DA's office finally moved forward with criminal charges. Nathan was arrested at his apartment for assault, poisoning, and violating the restraining order. They processed him and released him on bail within 4 hours, his mother posting the $100,000 without blinking. She was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, which meant they were still building the case against her. Our civil suit got filed that same week with all 7 of us listed as plaintiffs. Nora had worked around the clock preparing the paperwork, calculating damages for medical costs, lost wages, and pain and suffering. The court scheduled our initial conference for the following month. Within hours of the filing going public, Rex's story exploded across social media. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with interview requests from news stations and podcasts. I ignored them all, too exhausted to deal with becoming some kind of poster child for medical abuse. 3 weeks later, I was walking to my car after a doctor's appointment when I saw Nathan waiting by the parking garage elevator. My whole body went cold, but I forced myself to stay calm. He started walking toward me, close enough that I could smell that cologne he always wore, the one that used to make me feel safe. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 on speaker, loudly describing his location and that he was violating a restraining order. He kept coming closer, saying he just wanted to talk, that I was overreacting, that we could work this out. I backed toward my car while keeping the phone raised so the operator could hear everything. When he reached for my arm, I remembered the sterile swab I'd been carrying in my pocket for weeks, waiting for this exact moment. As he grabbed my wrist, something fell from his jacket pocket. A small syringe case hit the concrete with a plastic clatter. I bent down quickly, using the swab to pick it up without touching it directly, collecting his fingerprints and probably DNA from where he'd handled it. He tried to grab it back, but I was already moving toward the area I knew had security cameras. The 911 operator was asking for updates while I described everything that was happening. Nathan finally seemed to realize how bad this looked and started backing away. Security guards appeared from the building entrance, having heard the commotion. Nathan turned and ran while I stood there holding the syringe case wrapped in the sterile swab, my hands shaking but my mind clear. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about evidence, about making sure he couldn't do this to anyone else. The police arrived within 10 minutes, and I handed over the syringe case wrapped in the sterile swab. The officer bagged it carefully while I showed him the security footage on my phone of Nathan approaching me. They arrested him right there in the parking garage while I watched from behind my car. His face went from angry to shocked when they put the handcuffs on. Detective Collier called me later that afternoon to say the evidence I collected was perfect for the case. He said most victims panic and don't think to preserve DNA evidence like that. The syringe tested positive for Lupron and had Nathan's prints all over it. 2 weeks later, I found a new apartment across town with a doorman and security cameras in every hallway. The building required key cards for the elevator and had a concierge who logged every visitor. I changed my gym, my grocery store, even the coffee shop I went to every morning. I started taking different routes to work and never parked in the same spot twice. The constant checking over my shoulder was exhausting, but I couldn't relax knowing Nathan was out on bail. My endocrinologist appointment that week hit me harder than I expected. She pulled up charts showing my hormone levels and explained the damage was permanent. My ovaries would never produce eggs again, and natural pregnancy was basically impossible. She talked about donor eggs and adoption, but all I could think about was the 67 eggs Nathan stole from me. The hot flashes would continue for years, and I'd need hormone replacement therapy for the rest of my life. She was honest about the increased risk of osteoporosis and heart disease from early menopause. I appreciated that she didn't sugarcoat anything, even though I cried in her office. 3 days later, the DA's office called with good news for once. They were upgrading Nathan's charges to include administering controlled substances without consent, which carried serious prison time. His mother was being formally charged as a co-conspirator based on the evidence we'd gathered. The prosecutor said Nathan's recorded admissions about his mother teaching him were key to making the charges stick. Rex's article went live that Friday morning, and my phone immediately started buzzing nonstop. He'd interviewed all 7 of us and included medical documentation showing the pattern of abuse. The headline alone made me sick, but seeing our stories laid out with evidence was powerful. Within hours, the article had thousands of shares, and the clinic's phone lines were reportedly jammed. A tip line the newspaper set up received over 40 calls in the first day from women with similar experiences. Some were from Nathan's mother's clinic, but others were from different fertility centers around the state. The medical board announced they were expanding their investigation to multiple facilities. Dana organized our first official support group meeting at a community center the following week. We created intake forms for new members and protocols for documenting their experiences safely. Aurora brought a therapist friend who specialized in medical trauma to help us structure the meetings. We set up a buddy system so no one had to go to appointments or court dates alone. Helping other women navigate what we'd been through gave me something to focus on besides my own anger. The group grew from 7 to 25 members within a month. Nora called an emergency meeting when the clinic's insurance company reached out with a settlement offer. They were offering $2 million to be split among all plaintiffs with no admission of wrongdoing from the clinic. The money would help with medical bills and ongoing treatment, but accepting meant we couldn't pursue further legal action. We spent 3 hours debating whether to take it or push for a trial that could take years. Some women needed the money immediately for medical care, while others wanted the clinic to admit what they did. We voted and decided to accept the settlement, knowing a trial might not go our way. The insurance company required us to sign within 48 hours, so we all met at Nora's office to review the paperwork. Each of us would receive about $280,000 after legal fees. It wouldn't fix our bodies, but it would cover treatment and give us some security. I spent the next weekend writing my victim impact statement for Nathan's criminal trial. I went through 12 drafts trying to capture what he'd taken from me. Not just my eggs or my fertility, but my trust in medical professionals and my sense of safety. I described the physical pain of forced menopause at 25 and the emotional trauma of learning babies existed from my stolen eggs. I wrote about the women in our support group who would never have biological children because of what Nathan and his mother did. I kept one copy of the statement in my desk drawer as a reminder that I survived this. My life wasn't what I'd planned, but I was building something new with women who understood exactly what I'd lost. That's all I've got for now. Congrats on making it to the end. I wasn't sure you would. Go ahead and subscribe if you want more questionable content.